Today in the EU, how national concerns drive European elections in Slovakia, Czechia, Latvia, and Malta. European elections often reflect national concerns, and Slovakia, Czechia, Latvia, and Malta are no exception. We are here to explain turnout trends, projections, and what drives the electoral campaign in the latest countries to close the polls. Hello and welcome. I'm Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. I'm joined in the studio by journalists Aneta Zachova, Liene Lusite, and Alice Taylor. Alice, let's start from Malta. Maltese voters will be voting for candidates instead of parties. How is the electorate divided?
I mean, the country is basically split in half, and people vote for either the Nationalist Party or the Labour Party, and that's sort of hereditary voting almost. But what's interesting about this is that people are voting for a nationalist candidate, that's Roberta Metsola, even though the vast majority of the electorate actually voting for the Labour Party in the local elections. So this is what's interesting about this system.
Let's focus on what's at stake in these European elections. What are the key issues for Maltese voters?
So issues have largely been sort of absent from the campaign, both at a local and a national level, EU level. People are not really interested in policy. As I mentioned, people tend to vote based on who their family vote for, maybe even who their employers are.
Right.
Malta has one of the largest public sectors in Europe. So a lot of people are employed by the state. This has increased significantly under the current government. So people are not really focused on policy. They're focused on personality. So as I mentioned, we have seen people voting for Metsola or expected to vote for Metsola, which means that there are probably some Labour Party supporters who are voting for her. And this is probably to do with the fact that she has been the European Parliament president and has brought sort of recognition to the country. So that's sort of a recognition of that.
And what about independent parties instead?
The independent parties and candidates, these people are running with more of a policy focus. So, for example, we have Arnold Kasola, who is an independent candidate, and he is running on a ticket of anti-government corruption, anti-nepotism, anti-graft. He's exposing corruption and scandals at a big and a small level. So this is his ticket. And then we have some slightly more extreme parties like Imperium Europa, who are set to be the third most popular party after the elections. I mean, the leader has been convicted of inciting racial hatred. And then there is another group as well, Christian Democratic group, who are sort of anti-LGBT, anti-abortion, anti-migration. So there are groups with more sort of policy focuses, but they tend to be fringe and they are unlikely to get a seat in parliament.
The country has been swept by several corruption scandals. Which are the parties involved? And do you think these allegations will impact the turnout?
Yes, so all of the scandals involve the ruling Labour Party, who've been in power since 2013. These scandals started basically when the party came into power. The latest one, which saw the resignation from the race of the commissioner candidate, Chris Fearn, is to do with a concession for private hospitals that was handed to a company with no experience in managing private hospitals. It cost the people of Malta hundreds of millions of euros. It was basically fraudulent. It involved kickbacks and all sorts of under-the-table dealings. And now a number of ministers, former ministers, as well as Fearn and former Prime Minister Joseph Muscat have been charged with offences, criminal charges related to this. But what the Labour Party have done is sort of turn this scandal around. They've used it as a way to mobilise their voters. So they've attacked the judiciary, they've politicised it, which has actually mobilised Labour voters to continue supporting the party. But I am curious to see, because I think this time, especially when it comes to candidates for European Parliament, I think Labour might be in for maybe a less than better result.
Moving on to Latvia, one of the other four countries to close polls last night, Liene, according to a survey, a third of Latvian residents expressed no interest in European Parliament elections. What's the issue here?
I think Latvian citizens don't really see the impact of the EU. Why is it important? We don't really see it feels like we cannot see beyond our own politicians. We perceive ourselves as a tiny country, so what can we do? What can we really influence?
For those that did cast their ballot, what are the most pressing concerns?
As it has been present in the pre-election debate, all the politicians, all the candidates, and in every debate, the most pressing questions, of course, is Ukraine/security and defense, because we are neighboring Russia. That's our big aggressive neighbor to the eastern border. And we are the front of the whole EU border as well. And of course, Latvians want to send MEPs to Brussels and Strasbourg that would also aim to level out the living standards, because we are lagging behind when it comes to average pay and standard of living.
Can you give us a bit of an overview of what the latest projections say for ECR and other parties?
Well, first of all, Latvians are getting an extra seat. Instead of 8, this time we're voting for 9 MEPs. And Robert Zīle, he's definitely leading the polls because according to a lot of surveys and experts, Latvians tend to vote for recognizable faces that have experience in the parliament already. And Robert Zīle, definitely not his first term, not his second.
We as a public polls leader before elections, we mobilized our electorate, and we will still keep the first position here in Latvia.
He's a professional MEP, let's say, so Latvians recognize him. And when it comes to the distributions, currently, according to the polls, the leading one is the National Alliance. The second one is the ruling Jaunā Vienotība, New Unity. They have been favored in the previous elections. If I'm not wrong, it was around 30% of all the votes. But since then, a lot of things have happened. COVID, war, and a few scandals within the last few months that have really impacted Jaunā Vienotība.
Let's talk about the seat distribution.
Polls don't really show any prominent leaders. Out of the 9 seats, currently 2 are projected for the ECR member National Alliance. Then 2 others would probably go to Jaunā Vienotība, which is the ruling center-right party, a part of the EPP group. And the rest of the seats, which would be 5, it really depends. The projections are really close, and it will be one by one. Well, a newcomer is, for example, Greens group.
Right, and this is the first time that the Greens are represented, right?
Yeah, so it seems to be a bit of a shift there. However, EPP is getting less seats, according to projections, while ECR might gain 1 more. They currently have 1 under the National Alliance, while they might get 2.
The spotlight is especially on the ethnic Russian minority. Who are these voters expected to choose?
It seems also quite impossible to project where would the ethnic Russian votes go, because in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, it's Saskanya, the most favorite ethnic Russians party, declared that they do not support Putin, and that cost them national elections. They didn't get past the 5% threshold, but now they have had time to prepare. So we still don't know where the ethnic Russians will go. There is another party that aims to represent ethnic Russians, Stabilitate. That is the only one that actually wants to make friendly relationships with Russia, more or less, at least get their cheap gas. But the rest of them, in the context of defense and security, are pro-Europe.
Finally, Aneta, in Czechia, the polls closed yesterday at 2 p.m., but we will not have the results until very late today. Czechia is one of the member states with the lowest turnout for European elections historically. However, according to data, turnout is significantly higher than 2019.
What we know, it is likely that we will overcome the turnout we had the last time, which was 28%. I think it will be somewhere above 30, maybe 32, 34%, but that is yet to be seen.
This is how Adam Trnejka, the youngest candidate from Czechia running for Stan, commented. What drove this increased participation?
I think it's higher people's interest in European affairs. I think it has significantly increased in recent years, and I think we can attribute this shift to the multiple crises that we have been facing. Firstly, COVID-19 pandemic, ongoing war in Ukraine, energy crisis, climate crisis, and the need for the transition. These issues have impacted life in the Czech Republic. So I think that, Czech citizens finally discovered that we are not living surrounded by vacuum, but that we are part of Europe and that really EU affairs are visible.
One of the key issues in the electoral campaign for Czechia was mass migration, despite the fact that the country does not face significant issues in that sense. How do you explain this phenomenon in the electoral campaign?
Czech citizens are very conservative, and that's why politicians are using migration in their campaigns. They often use it to spread fear and to position themselves as protectors of the Czech culture, of the Czech citizens, the Czech Republic as a whole. So I think that this history of the Czech Republic is pretty much linked with our current approach to migration issue.
ANO is expected to win several seats. We're talking about the Liberal Party, led by former Prime Minister and businessman Andrej Babiš. What did the latest projections say about it? What can we expect?
ANO became the member of Renew Europe, or ALDE, before, in times when ANO was full of really liberal politicians, because at the beginnings it was really formed by many people who had strong attachment to liberal values. But in the course of the years, most of these people left ANO because Andrej Babiš, the chairman of ANO, just shifted to more nationalistic, conservative approach, let's say. So now ANO is facing this strong criticism from the liberal political family. But still, when it comes to Renew or ALDE or the future liberal political family in the European Parliament, it's quite tricky because they need seats, and ANO will be probably the winner of the Czech elections, and they will have 6 or maybe even 7 mandates. So that's very interesting offer for the Renew.
In Slovakia, the vote did not run as smoothly as in Czechia. The election moratorium for the European Parliament elections had to be extended by at least 3 hours due to a white powder attack. Can you tell us more?
There was a powder found on the ballot lists in Slovakia, so the polling station in one of the towns had to be closed for some time. But at the end, the Ministry of Interior informed that it was just a harmless powder starch. As you can imagine, after the attack on Slovak Prime Minister Fico, the society is much more sensitive when it comes to some potential attacks and so on. So
now, the attempted murder of Robert Fico has changed the electoral campaign, changed its shape. How?
Yeah, I think it changed in that way that it was more calm. Slovakian politicians, they recognized that, the polarization of Slovak society is too high. So many of them refrained from some kind of political attacks on their opponents and so on. This was actually also visible in the Czech Republic. But few days ahead of the European Parliament elections in Slovakia, Fico published a video to inform the society about his health status. But he also used this video to blame again the opposition. So there are still attempts from the current Slovak government to blame Slovak liberal opposition.
Finally, let's look at the latest projections here too.
The latest projections say that Smer party, it means the party of the current Prime Minister Fico, will take the lead with 24%. The second place should go to Progresivní Slovensko, Progressive Slovakia, with 23% probably. So it seems that these two parties will have 4 seats in the European Parliament each. And they will be probably followed by Hlas. Hlas is the party of the future president of Slovak Republic, and polls predicted that Hlas could gain 10%.
I'm Jada Santana, and this was Euractivist Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite streaming platform. It will really help us spread the word about our work. This episode was produced by Miriam Sanz de Tejada, Nicoletta Yonta, and me. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.